Alright, so your DBQ is out of 100. I always go back and tinker with the scores. I gave some people the benefit of the doubt, saying the first time trying to get the documents in can be difficult. So as long as I can see that you tried, maybe you ran out of time, I give you some benefit of the doubt. Obviously, the next time I'll expect more. There's some organizational issues, as there always is. I should add one thing. Probably the biggest organizational issue that affected your essay, well, I give you benefit of the doubt, but we'll definitely affect it next time. This is one thing a lot of people have. When they organize it, these are events leading to secession. And secession took place after the election of 1860. I repeat, after the election of 1860. Let me say it one more time. The election of 1860. Kind of a big deal. But some people put down like their paragraphs, and they organized their body paragraphs like the first body paragraph, the election of 1860. Then the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is 1854. And then John Brown, which is 1859. Do you see a problem there? Now, I sympathize because you're thinking I need 3 paragraphs, you're thinking about what you're going to write. And so if you did that, you probably you did well on it, but did that, I probably didn't give you like a high, but I probably still gave you an or like that. You did well. But next one, we got to think about this, led to this, led to this. Does that make sense for everybody? I completely understand. You're thinking I got to get the paragraphs in. Sure. Almost everybody I got A's and B's. I've lost it. I'll come back. Almost everybody got A's and B's. There are a few C's here and there. I thought people did really well. I would go back and tinker with grades. Most of the time, I might give you more points. Don't read too much into the rubric. I'm guessing what the College Board would give. And for the first DBQ, I definitely have different expectations. Singing? She's at singing. Tim, you're here? Oh! Show. Show.
I'm sorry.
You didn't tell me. I want to give you more time. You're going to have to finish. I'll give you a check. I wanted to have these two, but I'm not paying. So we have a few issues here and there, but I'll let you finish that off first. All right.
I really have like little stars here in my place. Right here.
Okay, so real fast, let me share a couple things. EX, explain, examples. We need examples. OI, that's outside information. That's College Board term for historical evidence. That means things outside of the documents. And let me give you a good example of outside information. I put OI. I'm not using computer, I'm not programming right there. But that's not 0101101. But it's, for example, get your butt in. What is, for example, when people talk about, like document 1's the Republican platform, and it talks about no slavery in the territories. By the way, it says no slavery in the territories. Literally, territories. Not the whole United States. It says territories. Some people put down that the Republican Party didn't want slavery anywhere. No, it's territories. What's the term for no slavery in the territories? Free soil. That's outside information. Add that little bit extra. When the Republican or the Southern Democratic platform was against against any kind of restriction on slavery, what do we call that? States' rights. So I put down STRT in a bunch of papers, but that's not outside information. A scrawled GD or a check mark, that's good, got it. Usually on the documents, I put a little check. And I know might be some issues on document here and there, but that's fine. W, by the way, I might have WY, but W is weak. Q, address the question. If you don't answer about secession in your thesis statement, that's a big hole. The statement says secession. Summary, that's when people start summarizing the documents instead of connecting it to your thesis. A good example is that I had people in all three classes, my AP classes. You know, document A was the election, and people like literally wrote down the numbers, how many votes each candidate got. No, I don't need that. I need to show how that shows sectionalism, or the divide between the parties, or the Democratic Party was split. If you just copy that, that's a really bad sign. Oh, and I had a few people quote. No quotes, I want paraphrases. One time you use a 5-word quote, but quoting, any Yahoo can quote, AKA copy. Oh, and you notice a lot of R's, that's connect. Connect it back to the thesis. It's not enough to mention John Brown. You have to show how that terrified the South, and we're convinced that everybody in the North was John Brown, AKA Abraham Lincoln. And one problem people have, you never talk, I didn't speak without talking about secession. They just assumed I knew what happened. Assume on a DBQ that the person reading it knows everything in the documents and then knows nothing else. So you have to show them. So secession, it did not happen to the election of 1860. Oh, there are a bunch of events that led to it. And the documents refer to a bunch of them. By the way, there's one in there about Albert Brown, document 3, that mentions the burning of Kansas. I don't know what he's talking about either. He just made that up. That's just made up slave rebellion. John Brown was real. This might surprise you. Sometimes people lie to get what they want. Did I just blow you away? Yeah, I know. Not in here. Okay. So, if you haven't heard of it, don't refer to it in your essay. Does that make sense? You can write that down. I empathize. I understand. But think of it that way. But secession. Think about secession. Election of 1860, all of a sudden South Carolina seceded. Why? It wasn't because of anything that happened. It's for what might happen. Lincoln might be a John Brown. He might get rid of slavery. They might create a Republican Party in the South, and there'll be a Trojan horse. And they knew for a fact they'd be in the minority in the House and the Senate. Those are the reasons for secession. So it needed something about that. But let's get back to the main element. I'm saying a few things. For the first DBQ, and I know it's a bunch of documents to get into that material, I thought people did well on it. Almost everybody got an A and a B. If you got below a B, I'll give you a chance to redo one of the paragraphs, see if we can get that a little better. But I thought overall it was pretty good. And a lot of people miss context, and so I did take it. I didn't necessarily take any points off, but for the next one, I'm going to. You need background material. If your body paragraphs are about, let me just throw 3 out here. Ideological differences between the North and the South. Right? There's 1. Slavery in the territories. There's 2. That's another body paragraph. 3, election of 1860. AKA, that's how I would do it. I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just thinking in my mind, that's the way it would have worked best for me. That's the 3 paragraphs. What do you use outside of it? Well, talk about manifest destiny, industrialization. Heck, you can, if you don't mention compromise of 1850 and slavery of the territories, use it there. Dred Scott. Things you don't use in your body paragraphs, use in your opening paragraph. And not a list. Explain a couple, just brief explanation, 2 to 3 sentences. All right. And the other one is complex understanding. If you got your order wrong, you didn't get it. If you had in your essay election of 1860 followed by compromise of 1850? No, that's not complex understanding. I didn't take any points off your grade on top, but that's the way they would look at it on the exam. This, this, this. Which, by the way, once I said that, did everyone go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Right? I understand completely. You're thinking, I need 3 paragraphs. How do I do it? Yeah. So, let me show you a couple examples. I got 2 different sets of examples. So here is one. By the way, you notice I chose him handwriting. Yeah. I don't have the best handwriting. You know that. Mine's worse because I walk and don't straighten the paper out. I write like this. Don't ask why. I just do it. It doesn't make sense. I can't stop. But I chose these. That's a darn good brainstorm list, isn't it? Of course, you're not going to get everything in there, but it reminds you of things that you know and you can relate documents to. Good little basic thesis, right? Living territories, differences north and south, election of 1860. Look good? Was there another one? It didn't copy, or it was good handwriting, but it's a little, good brainstorm list. That's a couple mentions of the things for context. Basic thesis and 1860. A little bit off here. Harper's Ferry came after Bleeding Kansas, but not a big deal. Bleeding Kansas starts in 1854. Harper's Ferry is 1859. And then a little bit wordy in here, but very good outline. Let me show you a couple more. Okay, the handwriting is pretty small. But good brainstorm list. Good thesis, 1850 compromise. Should go around. Oh, John Brown, election 1860. Documents the facts. Good. One more. Compromise. In fact, that's almost the same. And then very basic, organized thesis. Compromise, the little stars, the one they're going to do half. Half is a problem. We will work more on that. I didn't make a big deal about it. I wanted to introduce it. The big thing I was trying to get is you use the documents. So if you got a 0 on half, I usually put summary, like you're just basically taking something from the document and not outside information to prove their analysis. We will go over that in more detail. The big thing I was worried about was using the documents. In fact, overall, you did it pretty good on the documents. If you didn't summarize, I thought people did well. I usually put a check next to them. Good job. All right, you can use that. Now let me give you one more. It's tight. Using 2 documents, document 5 and document 1. That's my type version of mine. My why. My why was I agreed with the statement and because it was political disagreements. That's my why. Because political disagreements applies to everything. It doesn't need to be ground or earth-shattering, but it is disagreements. Territories, ideology, culture. But overall, I thought people did well. In fact, so well, I think we should do another one tomorrow. Who's with me? If you got below 80, only if you did, stuff happens. We'll get it straightened out. Don't worry. The big thing is some people weren't organized or prepared. And for whatever reason, it just didn't seem like you were. Maybe you thought you were, but it just didn't seem like. Oh, if I put down doc, that means cite it correctly. Do not write. Everyone listen up here. Listen carefully. Do not start a sentence. Evan, listen carefully. Do not start a sentence with, in document 1, blankety blank. Say, the Democrat or the Republican platform said, and then at the end of the sentence, put down doc 1. Don't write in document 1. or I've seen a document one. Say who said it, or just say the Republican platform said this. Or, as a map of the election of 1860 shows for document 8. It's a little thing, but boy, would I hate for you to get docked by some stickler grading it on the AP exam because of that. Because, well, what is the AP exam? The Vigilante Parade! Sorry. Question, yes.
So it's just cool. Evidence the scene is
Outside information. So they refer to it when they're grading as outside information, but on their rubric, they call it historical evidence. It's their little terminology. And since I'm used to saying outside information, I'll put that down. And that's just, what do you know? Yes.
How do you get those? Because my dad had.
I think you got, for what, for sure.
Um,
Oh, I just wanted more. So, yeah, more explanation, that's all. Just a little bit more explanation over this.
Okay, so, well, if I put like,
He's an abolitionist. You might have done for that one, I just wanted more. So what, I gave you a 0 if how you could have explained a little more explanation. Don't read too much into that. I'm just guessing what the College Board would give you. So let's do it pretty well.
So when you put the OI next to something, does that mean add more?
Oh, I mean to add more outside of it. More explanation. If there's a random line, sometimes I can just put random lines, so don't read too much into that. I literally, and sometimes I circle things, don't read too much into that. I'm sorry, I just do that sometimes. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm like, circle! And yes. Blueprint. Blueprint. BPS blueprint. I'm a big stickler for the blueprint because just from hints for people grading it, boy, that's nice when they can see where you're going. That would be your topic sentences, and then that gives you something to relate it to. If you're related to that. And it just gives that aura of a very well organized, well thought out essay. Yeah. Outside information. Stuff you know. Stuff you know. So you have to add more information. It's not enough just to say what's in the document or just mention it. You have to give a little bit more outside information. Outside information and an explanation are very close. Okay, so let's go ahead then and take out your notes. Let's go and get to, we got right to Antietam, didn't we? One more thing I'm going to add very quickly. I might be gone tomorrow. I might be here. If I'm here, you'll be one of the first to know. Okay, you will be near the end because there's a lot of people already see me, but down here we're going to watch, my plan is to watch Universal Battle. If I'm not here, make sure you have that packet for the video, start Universal Battle. I'm going to have to fast fill a couple things. But, oh, while we're doing that, I have a gift. I come bearing gifts. So I put it on Teams, but I said I'd give you a paper copy of the reconstructions. Here it is. So the video, the links to it are on there. Please let me know if they don't work. If I am not here too, don't forget I did assign some readings. Next week is, we have a 3-day week. We have shortened periods on Friday, Wednesday. That's all right? Oh, that's going to be a really weird day. We need one more? We're good. We're good? On Friday, or Wednesday, they're not having lunch till after 5th period. You guys are going to be so hungry because you've been trained to eat after 4th. Remember, you're being trained to be good little factory workers. So get to work. So leading up to the Battle of Antietam, as you can see from this, Lincoln was looking for a victory so he could do what? Yes.
Make more about emancipation.
Yeah, emancipation. emancipation. They're pointing up at nothing. Lee invaded the North because he was hoping to get whom into the war? So what a moment in history. One of the most important moments. If they could change, the Battle of Antietam and the Peninsular Campaign had McClellan had a chance to end the war right there. Oh, what was the clash of ironclads? What were the two ships? Yeah, Merrimack and Monitor. And after that, what became most important in war? Industry and technology. They became key. And the role of people became even more. In fact, World War I, it'd just be dehumanizing. You're nothing but a number, a fodder for cannon, which is pretty terrifying. So, what did they find in the camp ring right near Frederick? The plans wrapped in it, and what? 3 cigars. So with that, we've mentioned South Mountain. We got that. He delayed. That was another golden opportunity. Then he delayed again. So we're coming to the 17th. And on September 17th, I think we had the 3 parts, right? And I told you the plan. So let me quick tell you the 3 parts. The first one would be in what's called the cornfield. Now think about corn just before it's picked. Have you ever been through corn? Ever walked through corn in September? It's like right here. And so they had to march through this cornfield. Here are reenactors going through. You can hardly see them, but see the half of the blue? They're going through the cornfield. And as they marched through, they hardly had a shot, and the Confederates started shooting, remember the term canister, into the corn. And it blazed back and forth across these cornfields. A bloody hell. The Union forces would get back. Confederates would push them back. Union forces got closer, back and forth. Reinforcements would come. It would even be bloodier. Back and forth it went. 3 Union generals would be horribly, well, not horribly, but wounded. Horrible is relative, isn't it? Including 2 of the best, Hooker and Meade. Back and forth they would go. And Lee did have to shift forces over, but they just barely held. The corn, much of it was cut right down to the stalk by shell fire and musket fire. And think, once again, pre-black or pre-high explosives. It's amazing the carnage in this battle. Also, just the absolute courage. There's kind of a swampy area here, and then a swampy area here, because they just had to keep coming back and forth here. This church right here, the Dunker Church, was it's a pacifist church. Ironically, some of the hardest fighting of the war would be there. Matthew Brady will own a photography studio in Philadelphia. And once he heard about this battle, literally that evening via telegram, he sent his photographers there as quickly as possible. And the afternoon after the battle, he took these pictures. And no one had ever seen anything like this before. Unless you were literally on the battlefield before or during or right after. These are Union soldiers that died, lying where they fell. They could not be buried yet. And think about campaigning and their diet. They were basically skeletons. And look at the bodies as they bloated in the September sun. This wasn't the glory of battle and romanticizing it. This absolutely shocked people. But you can also imagine Brady, when he did his exhibition, it became a sensation. People came over to watch this. Here's another shot in front of the Dunker Church, and these are Confederates. And you can drive, this road is now paved, but this road is still there. Here's Confederates, where they fell. Brady became such a sensation that photographers realized, what a great way to make money, which is terrifying and ghoulish. So every battle, they would quick run on the battlefield. So tomorrow, we're going to watch a little bit of Gettysburg, and they're going to show you pictures of bodies. Photographers are running right after the battlefield. In fact, while the second day of the battle, some of the bloodiest fighting took place at Gettysburg, at this place called Little Round Top. They're going to fight a little bit off to the right of this, and the day they're fighting over here, photographers are dragging bodies to get the most dramatic shot. How ghoulish and horrible, and that's the pictures you'll see tomorrow. Not these. But McClellan was sitting back behind the line and never ordered reinforcements. So this attack fizzled out before they had a chance to exploit it. So we're coming to the next one called, well, there's this sunken road. And here's the cornfield. And the plan was to attack here. One division under a general by the name of Mansfield, he was in his early 60s, he wanted to prove he could still fight. He was supposed to lead the attack, but he wanted to prove that he was brave. So he led at the front, riding his horse, waving his sword, yelling his men to follow him. What's going to happen to Mansfield? He's going to be mortally wounded, and his division's going to get lost. Literally lost. And McClellan never bothered to straighten it out. He was back a mile and a half behind the line on a hill. So they begin to attack along this road with corn along the edge. It's a road that, by erosion, it kind of became almost like a trench. Soon, this sunken road would be known as, the next part, Bloody Lane, as the fighting would rage back and forth, as Union forces would march in lines and march at the Confederates in this trench and were cut down literally like stalks of corn. Yeah. Yeah, there's only one day at Antietam. The other one we'll talk about Gettysburg.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And just a few Confederate forces could hold out. So here's a couple pictures. I've been here 3 times. And this one's looking down what it looks like today. And they have this observation tower that was built by the U.S. Military Academy. West Point built that. Because they still to this day come there. In fact, the second time I was there, there's a bunch of cadets there. They took a bus and they go through and they study this battle, which makes sense. But they were there. And I was going to run down and talk to them, but they ran away, and I know why they did. I mean, they literally came in and boom, we're gone. I was like, oh, I don't know what I would have said, but it would have been kind of interesting. But right here, there's a little way you get into it. And I got into it, and I took that picture. But it was really hot. It's over 100 degrees. And the humidity was 103%. Yeah, that you can go to beyond the saturation point. It was one of those, you're basically just dripping with sweat. You go into the shade and actually felt hot. That's how humid it was. So I walked in there, and I was literally took one step to the bottom of that, and I was covered with these black biting bugs. I mean, covered with them, like hundreds on my arm, on my face, going to my mouth, just everywhere. They're biting and nibbling. I lost 7 pounds when they just and I stepped out, and as soon as I walked up the edge, they were gone. It was the weirdest thing. And so, of course, being crazy, I went to have stepped down like this, and they covered my arm, and I'm like that. It was the weirdest thing. I don't know what the deal was. So I now know why those cadets said, we're out of here. We're going to go back to the bus. Well, one of the regiments that finally broke through was part of the famous Irish Brigade. Their leader was Thomas Francis Meagher, Irish patriot, condemned by the British for his role in the Irish Revolution of 1848. He's the guy who invented the Irish flag. If you look right here, here is a flag I got there of one of the regiments of the Irish Brigade. I like that flag. And that's the flag that's on that very stylized painting. They did break through, but McClellan never had any reinforcements to exploit it. A third of the men went down. There's Meagher's picture. He was this Irish patriot who convinced Irish immigrants that if we win the Civil War, he was a Democrat. He was what's called a war Democrat, for the war. And he said, if we win this war, this will help Irish independence. I'm not sure how either, but that's how desperate they were. They wanted to go back home to an independent Ireland. Most would never go back home. What do we know about him? I've mentioned him before. Yeah. After Fredericksburg, Lincoln would make him the assistant territorial governor of the territory of Montana. When the territorial governor ran away, he became governor. Yeah.
Is Mark County named after him?
Huh?
Is Mark County
Yeah.
named after him?
Mark County. And he would be murdered by pro-Confederate vigilantes in Montana. Back, I put it up here. There's the statue of Thomas Francis Meagher in front of our Capitol. That picture turned out pretty well. That's the monument at Antietam. That's the unveiling of it. And it is pretty amazing that vigilantes are so idolized in the state of Montana when they were literally traitors. It kind of blows me away. So let's have a parade about them and name a school after them, their mascot after them. What school? East Helena. I'm biased. I don't like the Confederacy. I'm going to tell you right now. I don't like it. I don't like traitors. So you understand my bias? Okay, good. I like that. That is an awesome statue. So the first time I was in Helena, it was green because it was copper. It was bronze. And they have since cleaned it up and it looks fantastic. So it's a really cool one. And yes, it kind of looks like meager, just, I know it's out. So, when that battle fizzled out, that's what it looked like after the battle. Look at all the bodies in there. Bloody lane. The next part, Burnside's Bridge. There's a bridge over Antietam Creek, and General Burnside, Ambrose Burnside, fresh from duty in North Carolina, he kind of had a really good reputation. He invented a breech-loading musket. But he was supposed to attack here. But instead of finding a ford, which he could have found here, where the men could have crossed a quarter mile down and not got their hips wet, and outflanked a couple hundred Confederates here, he kept trying to cross this 8-foot wide bridge and spent hours. And thousands of men killed or wounded to try to cross this bridge. So many times that the bridge is now known as Burnside Bridge. Confederates are on this hill looking down at it, and so they could just pick him up. He could have outflanked them, but he didn't. So when the cornfield died down, then Bloody Lane. Those that died down, and then Burnside's Bridge. Finally, a concerted rush got across the bridge. Here's a very stylized painting of it. Oh, perspective's a little off. But they crossed this bridge. The bridge is still there. And made it up onto the hill. It looked like maybe even after so many mistakes, blown opportunities already, this might win the battle and potentially end the war and save hundreds of thousands of lives. But who knows what history would have. In fact, as they're crossing, one of the brigades under a general by the name of Sturgis, yes, Sturgis, South Dakota is named after him. One of the brigades was from Ohio. One of the regiments was from Ohio, and in that regiment was my great-great-great-grandfather. He fought here, fought at Gettysburg. He was wounded a couple times, but he would end the war at Appomattox Courthouse with Lisa Rank. Had a great uncle that was there too. Had another great-great-great-great-uncle. Had another great-great-great-uncle that rode with John Brown. He rode with Brown after Pottawatomie Creek. He was not there, but he was later there. And then John Brown's son, John Brown Jr., actually wrote about my great-great-great-uncle, John Partridge. Did I tell you this story? Yeah, wrote about him in 1863 as they were fighting in Kansas. And he said, let's not forget old pockmarked, red-faced John Partridge. Must have had smallpox. But he was there again and always adding a little bit of fun. That's Partridge's. Okay. But
John C. Partridge?
no. Good guess, though. So actually, there's a bunch of partridges to this day that are probably somewhat related to me in Ohio. Which is ironic because now my brother lives in Ohio. So he made the whole circuit back. Well, just at the last moment, the last Confederate reinforcements on a forced march from Harper's Ferry just arrived at that moment. And they stopped the Union forces on this ridge right here And the exhausted Union Army just couldn't do it anymore, and they did. A third of McClellan's forces sat on a hill and never fought. If he would have committed those at any time, it's amazing how many lives would have been saved and everything would have been different. I don't know good or bad, and I can't go there. All I can say is this: there would have been a President McClellan, without a doubt. But the day ended, and literally they couldn't believe what just happened. It just blew them away. In one day, 28,000 casualties. One day. Almost well over 3,000 of those would be killed. There'd be hospitals that would be hastily set up in tents, just a sight of absolute misery. I mean, they could not believe what they were looking at. All the dead and wounded. And McClellan would blow another opportunity the next day. Lee lost a third of his men. The casualties were almost 50-50. Lee lost a third of his men, but he stayed in that position for another day. But McClellan was so shocked by the previous day, he couldn't attack. He just couldn't order an attack. He could have won right there. I empathize, but it could have ended the war. He couldn't do it. So that's the bloodiest day in American history to this day. To this day. September 11th was close. D-Day was close. One day during the Battle of the Bulge was close. Oh, Battle of the Bulge. That started on this day in 1944. The last futile German offensive of World War II in Belgium and Luxembourg. The biggest battle the United States has ever been in, the Battle of the Bulge. And also its biggest victory. Yeah.
I guess.
Really?
Yeah. Like, he was just like,
Sure.
but he was there.
Oh. Cold, tough.
He didn't really like
My grandpa was just south of him. And so he was just at the periphery of it. And they don't.
yeah.
So with that, Leeden's retreat. Who held the battlefield? Wasn't a victory, like a great victory, but at the end of the day, the Confederates retreated, and who was there? It was enough of a victory to do what? What was Lincoln thinking about issuing? The Emancipation Proclamation. Now, this is going to free all the slaves in rebellious territories. He didn't have the authority to free slaves in border states or in states and areas the Union had retaken, brought back into the Union. But in areas under rebellion, I'll add this, it would take effect January 1st, 1863. So 1/1/63. So he's still going to give the Confederates time to keep their slaves and come back. And this is showing Lincoln. Here he is writing it. It's all the great works of everything from the Roman Senator Cicero, Declaration of Independence, all these great documents were influencing him. So this is a pro-emancipation proclamation. I kind of like that picture. Here's the Confederate point of view. Here's Lincoln, and look at his inkwell. Who's holding it? Yeah, there we have the devil. But this is my favorite part. That's John Brown. That's kind of a demon, but they have him with a halo like Lincoln worshipped John Brown. Can't emphasize what a big deal John Brown was. So, did it free any slaves on January 1st? No, because the Confederates aren't going to free their slaves. The only way those slaves will be free is if what happens? Yeah, the U.S. wins, the North wins. The United States has to win. The U.S. has got to win. But once they made this war about slavery, it ended slavery. Slavery's dead. You can't tell people we're fighting to end this horrible system of slavery and then turn around after the war and said, just kidding. Can't do it. So the Emancipation Proclamation would set in motion the end of slavery. Now, The 13th Amendment to end slavery probably would not have passed in 1863, but it could pass in 1865. I don't know if it passed today. Next, Britain can no longer enter the war. They're done. Britain is the country opposed to slavery. How can they fight in the war that's now about ending slavery? When it was just about union, they could at least come up with an excuse. They thought about it. Now, there's no way. The Confederacy's on their own. That also shows you then how terrible of a policy King Cotton diplomacy was. And then lastly, this allowed for the recruitment of black soldiers. Now, they called them colored regiments during the war. They were black soldiers with white officers. We'll see them in the video. That's part of the reason I like the Universe of Battle so much. That's the 54th Massachusetts that would attack Battery Wagner. There was a fort near Charleston. The first colored regiment, as they were called, to go into combat. And there's, I would think, one of, if not the best Civil War movies, and yes, it's on your list, is about this regiment. There's a few flaws in it. They make a few mistakes, but overall, it's just really good. And it's called Glory. There's the Glory poster up there, given to me by Pepsi, but I took it anyways. And this would be decisive. The United States probably could not have won without soldiers not just fighting for freedom. Yeah. They're fighting for citizenship and equality. How can you deny somebody equality who's willing to sacrifice their life for you and your country? By the way, the United States would find a way to do it. We'll get to that after Reconstruction. And the same thing will happen after World War I and World War II. So, before we write Ambrose Burnside down, let me tell you something really quick. George McClellan's in command. He won this battle. Lee is retreating. And what does McClellan do? He sits on the battlefield for a full month. Lincoln goes down there and says, "You have to go." And McClellan refuses. Refuses. "My horses are too tired." And so Lincoln does it. He actually fires him. They do it in the middle of the night, scared that McClellan will march on Washington, D.C. and make himself dictator. As arrogant as he was, that was not McClellan. He was very loyal to the country. He was a patriot. But he was furious. And Lincoln didn't know who to pick. Who? Well, they took the bridge. Ambrose Burnside was ordered to take command. Burnside did not want it. In fact, he knew, I can't do this job. I can't do it. But Lincoln ordered, "You're taking over command of the Army of the Potomac." Burnside was already incredibly popular and become really popular after. He was a bachelor, and so it was his picture would be the most famous one. In fact, either people swooned or they were jealous of him for one very prominent feature. He was considered the most handsome soldier in the Union Army. Everyone had his picture. Soon men would copy that and grow them a great pair of Burnsides. So they'd get a pair of Burnsides. That's where sideburns comes from. Burnsides would become sideburns. So have you ever heard that term? Think Ambrose Burnside. And I agree, yeah, it's kind of overwhelming, right? I'm very jealous. Because I can tell people are swooning, "Oh, look at him." Okay, moving on. He didn't want command, but he knew, I have one job now. I don't care if it's winter, I have to destroy Lee's army. And so Sharpsburg is up here. Lee retreated to here. Burnside now, reinforced over 100,000 men. Lee's been reinforced, more recruits, up to about 60 to 70,000. They're sitting here, and there's a big forested area here in Virginia. Here's this forested area with the name The Wilderness. I'm not making that up. Here's Washington, D.C. Richmond is down here. Burnside has a good plan. What if he does a quick march, crosses the river at the town of Fredericksburg, and gets into open territory here and uses his superior numbers to win? Not a bad plan, because he knows my order is to attack. So he does it. He marches here, has his men march, and they beat Lee. He beats Lee by 2 days. The problem is there were supposed to be bridges that would come down with engineers to cross the river. They weren't there. So Burnside got there, couldn't cross the river, the Rappahannock. He had to wait a full month till the bridges got there. By then, Lee's forces had taken to the hills right here, dug trenches, and were waiting. But Burnside didn't know what else to do, so the Battle of Fredericksburg. And Fredericksburg alone, just the name is going to have meaning. Oh, I should tell you the date. December 13th, 1862. So they crossed the river, and I like these paintings because it shows, see these little rafts? It's a pontoon boat, or pontoon bridge. And so they would take these rafts and then anchor them down, put boards over them, and so it's a floating bridge. Still use them today. And they cleared the shore, the town burnt down, and soldiers looted because soldiers, from time eternal, from the beginning of armies through today, loot. One of the horrors of war. But then, here they are waiting. And Burnside now is going to decide what he's going to do. Because it goes, almost slopes up to these almost mountains. And Lee is entrenched in, just waiting for him. He decides, well, we're going to attack because I'm here. And so, Lee had this long trench line. If you go there today, the trenches are still there. So you go along these trenches. And right here is another one of those sunken roads with a, this is after the battle, with a stone fence. So it's a heck of a fortified position. Not just that, there's nearly a mile of flat, no trees, almost not even a little bump in the ground, just flat up to the Confederate trenches. So any Union force has got to go across a mile of open territory. And guns on the hill, how could they ever miss? So Burnside is going to try to overwhelm here with over 60,000 men and have a diversion down here. That's his plan. So early in the morning, it's about 35 degrees. You'll think like December 1862. They begin to attack. And they lined up in their rows, and they marched up this hill towards the Confederate lines looking down at them. And it was slaughter. At a mile, the Confederates started shooting cannonballs and explosive shells. But cannonballs, you think doesn't explode. But they would shoot it at an angle at marching men, so it would bounce through them. Remember Santa Ana? And then when they got closer, canister. And then musket. The first line got to about 40 yards, and they just couldn't go any further. And they hit the ground. But there's no shelter. What's the only cover they have? Dead and wounded men. And they would huddle there the whole day in the cold. Burnside sent more men. In fact, there's stories of wounded men trying to grab out and say, don't go, it's slaughter. And they got to about 30 yards. The closest they got to was about 15 yards, and they just couldn't go any further. They were just cut down and rolled, just mangled heaps of flesh. Burnside, so distraught, was going to lead the third wave from horseback. He'd be dead. No way he'd survive. He didn't lack courage. He lacked other things, but not courage. His staff pulled him off the horse and said, you can't do it. By the end of the day, could there be about 20,000 total casualties? 13,000 of them were Union. In fact, the only place the Union forces broke through was the diversion. And then a more horrific sight. That night, there were just thousands of wounded men. And so they went out and brought water to them, tried to pull some back, but it's still combat. I mean, black got below freezing, so many died that night. And then a very macabre scene the next morning. There were all these naked Union soldiers dead out there. Remember the Confederate uniforms? They were freezing to death. And so they went out at night and stripped the dead Union soldiers of their coats and stuff so they would stay dead. I don't blame them with that. I think you get the point there. From then on, that's what everyone could talk about. We want our own Fredericksburg. But what side do we want to be on? The side dug in and let's let them attack us across the big open clearing. Did you hear what I said? I wonder if that's going to happen someday. Could it be a place called Gettysburg? So, Fredericksburg. By the way, what's going to happen to Burnside? He's going to survive into the next year, but finally Lincoln will fire him. Seems like we're running out of generals, doesn't it? Noel McClellan would not be brought back. That is the massive picture of that. This is at the actual battle site. And if you go there now, the national park, it's maybe a quarter mile of the clearing, but you do get a pretty good idea. And there's a couple really good restaurants there. The Iron Brigade Cafe, I highly recommend it. I got a very good hamburger there. So I like going to these places, but I also really like to eat. And on that note, so tomorrow, if I'm not here, what are we going to do? Run away in fear? No. is yours. Okay, so.
What's your problem?